from our area for their artistic excellence, for their commitment to the arts. We have 21 artists this year, so we're going to have to move quickly. A lot of them are coming. This is a exhibition/fundraiser, which means that all of these artists have generously donated a piece of artwork for a silent auction that will occur tomorrow night. It's one of our 2 major fundraisers for the museum for the year. So it's a very big show, and it's a very big offering from the artists. As you know, they don't make their work for free, and so it's a big thing for them to give us work, and we really appreciate that. So let's get started with Robert.
Good morning.
My name is Robert Mickelson, and the pieces that I brought into the show are the glass sculptures that you see here. And I guess the purpose of this is to give you a briefing about the work so that you will be able to field questions from the public. Isn't that why we're doing this?
Yes.
Okay. So let me first give you a brief overview, and then I'll do a brief, just a brief description of each piece, and then I'll leave it open to questions for you guys. Okay. First off, my medium is called borosilicate glass. It's a very special kind of glass. The most common brand name is Pyrex, which you're all familiar with. I use borosilicate glass, B-O-R-O-S-I-L-I-C-A-T-E, because it is very heat resistant and enables me to do elaborate sculptures using the technique which I am known for, and that is called flame working. I work with a torch that runs on an oxygen propane flame, and I melt rods and tubes of glass in the flame from that torch. All the pieces are sculpted freehand using the glass while it's in its molten state. I'm kind of known for being a little bizarre, and my approach to the work is based on fantasy, whimsy. I'm not really trying to make profound statements as much as I'm just having a good time, and I'm allowing the imagery of the work to sort of stimulate thoughts in people's minds. I'm not really trying to tell them anything or to say anything particular. I am just hoping that they'll look at the pieces and either be amused or thoughtful or whatever their personal response to the work is. Some of these pieces are composed of a number of parts that are then assembled. Sometimes they're hot assembled, and sometimes, as in several of these pieces, I use what we in the glass trade called chemical bonding, glue. We don't like that word because it sounds all... in any case, so technically that's how I do the work. It's flame working, glass, and then they are assembled into the sculptural forms. As far as where the ideas come from, they tend to evolve while I'm working. I don't really try too hard to sit down and completely work out a concept before I begin. I tend to let the concept happen during the process. So it's an evolving type of process. I guess what happens to most people when they look at these pieces, and you're going to be asked, where does he get his ideas? What happens to most people is that they look at a piece and they think that the process was a linear process from A to Z, but that's not really how it works for my art. I don't really think it's how it works for a lot of art. I think the process is much more like a rat in a maze. Constantly running down dead ends, changing your mind, spinning your wheels, undoing, redoing. Ideas come flying in from the ether, then you apply those or discard those. And in the end, because of this strange, convoluted, non-linear path, that's why the piece looks the way it does. You could not get there if you went from A to Z. Does everybody follow what I mean by that? I think that's important to understand about the nature of my work. Let me go through the pieces one by one, because that's what it occurs to me. But like in all of these 3 pieces, it's more of a personified sculpture, like a creature or a personality, I guess you could call it. And this piece is glued at one point. The top was made separately and the bottom was made separately, and then it's assembled right here. And it's... Want to take the case? No, I think it's fine just the way it is. I don't know what else to say about the sunflower except that I really like it. I love the colors. I love the surface. It's around 2 years old. It's called Trip to Nowhere. And obviously the premise here, the little propellers all spin, although we don't want to encourage our viewers to touch them. And then of course the wheels, and of course what we have is implied motion, but the motion is around in a circle. So although he could exert a tremendous amount of energy propelling himself or wheeling himself, he doesn't go anywhere, he just spins around in circles.
Spins its wheels.
Exactly. A collector who lives in Winter Park, Florida. His name is Steve Goldman. Quite a prominent collector of art. He's been featured in the Orlando Sentinel a number of times. Very nice guy to let me take these pieces out of his house and exhibit them here. And I have always sort of trended away from that. I want the glass to be able to do other things that it does well. And one of the things that it does well is give me a gritty, grainy, organic surface. And I do that by sprinkling glass powders onto the surface. Like glass can be powdered up to the consistency of cake flour. And then when the surface is hot, I can sprinkle this on using a sifting-like device and then cook it with the flame. And it doesn't melt all smooth. It just sort of crackles up and gets this crinkly, lovely, I just love this, it's like a Chilean avocado. That surface is just really nice. And that's how it's done. It's just powders sprinkled onto the surface.
How do you get
Many different manufactured colors. And there's a number of different ways I can do it. In the case of the propellers here, the glass in the propellers is red glass rod that I buy, and I use red glass. In the case of the body of the vessel here, that again is glass powders which are applied to a clear bubble. And that's how I achieve the gradient, the blue to green gradient that you see there is that one end of the bubble had this blue glass on it, the other end I rolled it in the green glass, so that gave me this nice gradient. So there are a number of different ways of coloring the surface. I can use powders on the surface of the glass, or I use the actual manufactured glass color. So I work with clear and color and powder and all the different forms that the glass comes in. To this body where you really run the risk of you put the body itself at great risk to make hot seals there. And then the seals really aren't as strong as the glue itself. This particular kind of glue is a very expensive, high-tech form of epoxy that's stronger than the glass itself. In other words, if I were to drop this piece, it would smash in a million pieces, but it won't break there. It'll break every place else. Modes of transportation at his disposal. 54 or so. This medium, and I've always been limited by size. And I wanted to try to make something that was a little larger human figure. And I came up with this plan of doing a kind of a lattice work, of representing the form, instead of solid surface, to do a lattice work. And it started off as an experiment, and then it just worked out. It took me about 5 full days of work to build her. And the question that I always like to ask people is, where did I start? What was the first line? And of course it's a trick question because that line's gone. It got stripped out in the process of building the piece. But if you try to imagine, that A to Z process again of how this thing came to be the way it was, the only thing that I had to work with was a photograph of a sculpture that I tried to imitate that pose. And I chose the pose because it was a difficult one. Because of the extreme bend of her back and the angle of her legs and the turn of her head, all the different aspects of this, it was a pose that required quite a bit of imagining in order to try to picture. Since I only had one view of it, in order to see it from all sides in my head, I had to do quite a bit of experimenting. So I simply tried to represent the surface of the piece with straight lines, or actually just rods of glass. This is all 4mm borosilicate glass, bent around and sealed together in this lattice work. And it took me actually 2 days to figure out what to do with her left hand, because her left hand was up in the sculpture and I didn't want it to be empty. And I ended up putting a spear in it, and I don't know if I like that yet. If I could have thought of some other wittier thing to put in her hand, maybe I would have done that. But the spear does provide a kind of a third leg, because without it she'll tip over that way. Places hand, arm, breast, and hip.
all hot sealed?
It's all sealed there so that it's welded in place.
Pieces. Oh, hello. We know, because sometimes I can be kind of quiet.
Suzanne Clemens.
That's me. Yep. These 4 pieces here are mine, and they're representing pretty much 3 different bodies of work chronologically. This piece here is the oldest piece. They're all very autobiographical. Everything I do represents a moment in time or something that I'm dealing with at the time or an experience. This whole series I have a book for as well, and I'm over at the Fifth Avenue Art Gallery, so if you ever get curious, there's a copy of this book over there and you can read more about it. Or you can check me out online at www.suzanne, it's S-U-Z-A-N-N-E, Clements, C-L-E-M-E-N-T-S.com. This piece and the whole series has to do with medical issues that I had. And I was undiagnosed for over a year, had constant pain and lots of trouble and didn't know what was going on, and I went from doctor to doctor to doctor. And the first part of the series has to do with trying to self-quiet and self-comfort and find that inner peace, so that anxiety of not knowing what's wrong with me and what is happening, I can sort of quiet that. And then there's a whole series that I moved into the bathtub, and it's really sort of cocooning yourself and trying to become quiet again. This one's called As It Fills. Pardon me. This one is in the private collection of Scott Applegren, and so it is on loan. This piece here would be chronologically next. It's called Better Days. This is after the medical issue was revealed. It ended up being that I had a gallbladder problem, so it wasn't anything too serious. And this is the painting that represents the moment before I have my surgery. You'll notice in a lot of my pieces I have butterflies and turtles and all sorts of little pieces, and they all have certain meanings to them. In this case, I've got a butterfly here that almost sort of blends into the background. It's called Better Days. I had a lot of trouble with my surgery, and it took me about 2 years to recover. I was getting sick daily, sometimes 6 times a day. So this is before my surgery. I was in a moment of calm and quiet and peace because I knew what was going on. And we went up to our cabin in Wisconsin, had sandalwood, for a week before I had my surgery. So it's just a moment of quiet and peace and calm. But the butterfly always represents in my pieces fragility, change. They aren't always a pleasant existence in my paintings. Although they're pretty, they're very fragile. And that sort of represents how I feel about my health. Is, you just never know. The next piece here is Waiting for Tomorrow, which is sort of almost, it plays off this one here, but this is sort of me adopting my new life in Florida. I'm not from here originally, but I absolutely love it. With my transition down here, I was able to finally take on fine art full-time. And so it's just a moment of quiet contemplation as I consider all the options I have. It's all acrylic on canvas. I was originally an oil painter, but I had very big canvases when I first started painting, which obviously I don't now.
Does the white ibis signify anything
It's
particular?
Florida.
Just Florida? Okay.
And when I was an oil painter and I had to transport my paintings to and from college, my mom really didn't want me to get her car messed up. And carrying them over campus on windy days was kind of dangerous too. So this would be the last one of the series. It's called Moving On, and I'm trying to get myself out of my paintings. Just a little bit. Getting up and moving on. So hopefully there's only a few more of these left, and then I'm going to find something else to do. So anytime you see a turtle, it's a literal representation of patience. And again, the butterflies are here. I've got my little pocket watch. It's time to stop being so patient with myself with these pieces and move on and find something else to do. So, does anybody have any questions? With each painting, I take maybe 100 to 300 photographs, and then I go into my computer and try and determine which image I feel works best for what I'm thinking about. Like the other artist, I don't sketch. I just have sort of a general idea of what I might want to deal with in the painting, and I'll assemble what I need with that. Take the photos, take a look at what's on the camera, sit back down, or do whatever I'm doing. Look at it again, adjust the angle, and as soon as I find something that works, then I move on to the next stage, which is taking that photograph, and sometimes I'll make adjustments to it in the computer, adding things, taking things away, and then I use that as my reference for the paintings.
And this is the donated piece I donated for the auction. My medium is oil. I generally paint with glazes as a medium to create translucent quality. So, and that is, it's a combination of Damar varnish, linseed oil, and turpentine. And it allows you to create, you can use the paint in a very creamy fashion. You can use it as a transparent medium. And so you can work back and forth and create different looks or different results for different situations. I also use a fairly limited palette. When I first started painting, I was buying pinks and purples and turquoises, and now I'm down to basically 6 colors, and 2 of the atypical ones are mauve blue shade and transparent orange. And they're sort of the anchor of my palette because I can use them for grays and I can use them to warm color. And the limited palette also results in a greater color harmony throughout the painting. Plein air painting is a passion of mine. And so most of my subject matter then becomes either landscapes or seascapes. And the experience is, this was done in the studio from a digital photo that I'd taken. But the outdoor experience of painting, I think, brings to the studio a better understanding of light and atmosphere. So I feel I'm better able to translate photographic images because of the outdoor painting experience. I'll coat the entire painting and then paint into it wet. And it's a medium that I learned from Richard Currier in a workshop I did with him last year. Or was the year before, I believe. From the other person that uses that, a gal by the name of Gay Falconberry. She's a nationally recognized plein air painter. And I've painted with her. I loved her palette. It's difficult to use, but for me, it was just very, very, it worked for me. And it produced the colors and that I gravitate toward. That was a product also of early morning paintings on site, and then this finished painting was done from a digital photo. And also observation, I might add. I mean, going out there without my paints or without, just with just my cup of coffee, you can learn just as much because you have more time to think about what you're looking at in terms of temperature and color values. Sort of late afternoon, it's not a sunrise. Now this I can do at this time of day. I can stay out for 2 hours and paint or 3 hours and paint with not all that much change because you can establish the patterns of light and shade very, very quickly, and you can stick with those. And as those change, the colors don't change or the values don't change as rapidly as they do in the early morning. Okay. Again, I had a ski house in Vermont for 20 years. And Vermont is just one of those beautiful places that is just filled with opportunities for painters. And this was an actual location in Vermont, and it was on the way to a swimming hole that I would go in the afternoons. And this is from the collection of Tom and Dottie Powers. It's using a lot more broken color. It's very different. It's very different. That I did 4 years ago. Pinks and and violets and purples out of the tube, and I don't do that any longer. I make those colors and mix them. Gives you a little better color harmony, I think, especially when you're working on darker subject matter.
20 years old.
Really?
Yeah. It goes back to an early phase that I was in back in the 80s, and it belongs, I'm Nancy Dillon, and it belongs to Mark Cool. And this was one of the paintings that I did in the Barrier series, and I worked with the Barrier series in a literal stage for probably about 10 years, and then I evolved it into the non-literal Barrier stage. And you might say that what I have done since then, whether it be realistic landscape or whether it be the Groundhog series, it has a barrier in it as well. It implies barriers. And so when I think about barriers, to me, okay, I was a teacher at BCC for 35 years. I just retired in May. And these paintings don't reflect my latest work, but they do reflect what I was thinking of while I was an instructor at the college. If you were to see my work now, you'd think, wow, she's been released. But no one has seen them yet. And I will be having a show in Stewart in January, and that will be a lot of the new work. Anyway, if you notice, I love color. That's one of the things that is very common in all my paintings, is the range of colors that I can create. In a way, this piece is also influenced by the Impressionists because of the patches of color that are placed next to one another. This was during the time when the Melbourne Causeway was under construction, and also the O'Galley Causeway was under construction. So there was a lot of change taking place in the environment. My paintings usually do revolve around an environmental statement. But also being a teacher at BCC, change was an important thing in education. And the change that my students would always want to find their place and what their degree was going to be, and they wanted to be artists, but their parents didn't want them to be artists. And so that was the fear of change and the fear of the future, and so that was also another element in regards to barriers that I was thinking about. Series, and I worked on it for at least a good 10 years as well. You can sit back down. But you'll notice that there's a difference in application between this one and the Carl one, and the two that are on either side of the groundhogs. I'm still playing with my wild use of colors, and the groundhog is in the collection of Tom and Cindy Donahue. And this is called the class of 96. And so it was painted in 96. That helps me remember when I did it. But it also, I had been looking at a bunch of little photographs that my mother had when she was a teacher in Leesburg back in the 40s. And there were little portraits of her students, And I kept wondering what they look like today. But anyway, I was thinking, well, I might do something with my groundhogs and call them the class of '96 because this was my interpretation of their different personalities, you know. And so even though I use the same basic groundhog over and over and over again, I try to change the facial expressions a little bit and the size relationships. And I do work from sketches. Because I was a teacher, sketching was very, very important for me because I didn't have that much time. And so I would, if the creative spirit hit, then I would sketch, and then I would, when I had a chance to paint, I would paint it. And usually the painting would evolve into its own thing, but at least I had something to start from.
Why groundhog?
Why groundhogs? Well, my husband is always a very important influence in my work, and he's from Pennsylvania, and he grew up on a farm, and well, Punxsutawney Phil is also up there, but what happened was, in my interpretation of his story, it's not the same as what he says it really happened, of course, but my interpretation was, here he was about 3 years old, he was out in a field in a summer day, and a groundhog was mesmerized, I guess, by the sun, and just was unaware that he was there. And apparently my husband approached him and shot the groundhog and scared the dickens out of him. And so one year I was up in Tennessee, where I go to take classes and to teach at Aramont School of Arts and Crafts. And I went into a shop and I found a postcard of groundhog, and it reminded me of the story he had told me, and so I sent it home to him, and I said, do not throw this away. And so I didn't know what I was going to do with it at the time, but evolved into the series, because I just like to be able to do facial expressions and create a human personification with an animal, whether it be a groundhog or an imaginary animal or whatever. So that's why I did groundhogs. They also are symbols for the underdog, if you want to call it that, whether it be a good or a bad thing, because it's another thing of change. You know, they destroy as well as they're necessary to live. Now, this piece and this one is called Picket, and this one is called Twilight Passage, and they were done within the last year. And this one has gone through about 4 evolutions to get to this stage, and I could not find the right position for the crow, raven, crow, whatever you want to call it, big bird. But this bird here has been flipped around, I don't know how many times. And but I like it this way now better, because this shows again passage. This dog is moving through a field. The color sort of suggests a time of day that might be early morning or late afternoon. It is an agricultural space. There is a red bird in the field as well underneath the blackbird, and the blackbird I see as a protective figure. And the blackbird and the red bird are looking at the dog that's passing through. Yesterday when we were here at the Girls' Night Out, it was hung backwards, and it just didn't make any sense. So I decided to change it, so some people that were sitting here said, uh-oh, does she know what she's doing? I think I did. Okay, so anyway, the landscape could be anywhere in a rural environment, but in reality, it's close to where my sister lives up in North Florida. And I grew up in North Florida, so I'm just attracted to the farm landscape. Whenever I can, I do that. This piece is called Picket, and what do you associate with Picket? Anything else?
Picketing.
Watch, like a guardian, a guard on watch.
Picket line.
A picket line, all right.
Line, yeah.
Okay, so This particular scene was based on a photograph, and being the teacher, I brought the photograph that I work from. This is a scene in Cades Cove in the Smoky Mountains. And there's a place that I go every time when I go up to teach plein air painting. And it's close to the Cantilevered Barn, if you're familiar with Cades Cove. And I always am pulled into this valley, this section of the valley. And I've done about 4 or 5 pastels or oil paintings of this particular area. So this is the largest one of this study. And I have been doing a bunch, as you can see, with crows or ravens or that type of bird. In fact, I didn't bring that. I was going to bring a sketch that I had done. Then I probably will turn it into another thing at some point. But I will also go to different websites and find images of crows. These are from a book in the library. But I just try to find the right angle that will communicate or take parts of it and refer to it. And I always, when you look at this particular picture of the crow, you can't see the detail in the feathers. So I'm looking for things that I can use that are somewhat anatomically correct. And if you get in the right light, I'm not saying that this is the right light for it, but there are interference colors on here. And I make my own paint. I work with dry pigment and burnt plate oil, which is the binder for intaglio or etching ink. And because I work with that, I have found through trial and error that you need to work in very thin layers and build up the colors. And so I use a lot of dry brush, and I use a lot of glazing materials, and I work from a monochromatic, these 2 pieces will work from a monochromatic color scheme where it may have been, I think red was a color in here, a dark red, a cadmium red dark was the monochromatic color that I started off with. And this one, it was red also in here, but I wanted red to be a background that is the opposite color for the normal landscape, which is going to be greenish. And so that's what I usually do, is try to pick the opposite color to start with. And then I build up all these layers of transparent colors and opaque colors until I finally get the final phase. And I don't know how many layers are in here. I mean, I'd probably say 20, but it's probably 50 layers of paint just built up over and over.
How many hours does it take you to do that?
Well, I have gotten to the point I take, since I used to teach a business of art class, I have kept records on that. And in general, it took me about 5 months to complete this painting. I was also working on this one at the same time. But this one I started last summer, and I finished it for the faculty exhibit in November. But I changed it because I didn't like the bird over there. And so it was finished really sometime this spring. This one I started in November, and I finished it in May. So I think it was like 190 hours for this.
Nancy, what's the difference? You said there was a difference in that.
Well, if you look at this, it looks drier, flatter, and
Not as many layers?
not as many layers, absolutely. Not as many layers. So that also shows you how my work has evolved. And I treated this as if it was a mini retrospective, so that you could see the different phases I've gone through over the 20 years that I decided to show. On this one. So you can see it's changed. See, I took things out. Scale changed on the size of the bird. And I'd vacillate back and forth between my fruit and vegetable landscapes and my imaginary things. But this was the original sketch. that I did, and my goal was, since I was going to divide it up into 4 panels, was to make sure that each of the 4 panels could stand alone. Yeah. And so each one has a balanced composition. So that was the goal.
To start with,
Your name?
pardon,
Your name.
Fran Knight,
Thank you.
because I came in here and I cannot remember doing this painting. This is quite a while ago. I would say in the 80s, late 80s perhaps. Many of you have heard me speak before. I doodled. My instructor said that I should call these automatic drawings and not doodles. He didn't like the term doodles, but they are doodles. I watch TV, watch a movie, or listen to a speech, boring, be at meetings, someone's talking and I'm just automatically drawing on whatever I could find, usually the booklet or whatever came with the layout of the problem, whatever they were doing at that time. This is looks like watercolor. It is watercolor. It's aqua media. It's actually acrylic used like watercolor. I find that I can get a much more intense color. I can get a richer color, and I can get a more permanent color, especially when I started to do outdoor shows, and the heat would get at them, and you'd get dribblings down inside the plexiglass. And so I was very pleased with using acrylic. It's dangerous. You can't erase it. You can't put it in a bathtub and wash it off like you can with a watercolor. It's a very honest media. You can use it, and that's it. But it's used very much like watercolor. I'll put one color on top of another and get a variety. So this comes from a little 4x6. My husband was so thrilled with my doing these little drawings that I must have a stack of papers like that. That will take me through another lifetime, I guess. But this is one of the original ways that I started working with. This is prior to monotype. The funny thing is I don't have a monotype in here now. And yet I started the monotypes in '89, and I was really very enthralled with it. It was something that I used to do with my students because we had desks that they could put ink on or paint on and put a piece of paper on top of it, and then use a stylus or a pencil or a pen, draw on the back of the paper, lift the paper, and they had a monotype. And that's really what a monotype is. Many of you have rubbed against over a nickel with a piece of paper. You've made a monotype. So that's what monotypes are, which I don't have here, but I would say the greater body of my work has been monotypes. This is one of my 2 most recent ones, completely different. You won't see too many of my work that are very similar. I seem to go from one extreme to the other. This actually started right on the canvas. I started with my left hand, with a piece, most likely a piece of charcoal or something. No, I didn't. I started with a bucket of paint, black wall paint, latex acrylic wall paint. Dipped a palette knife in it and went to work just with the drips and lines that the palette knife made, which is completely without control of this up here. It just comes from within. And I like working that way. Then I had these lines, and for some reason they looked a little bit like trees, but I wasn't going to think about trees because I didn't want to just draw trees or paint trees. I always feel that my work is perhaps strongest in its design quality. I'm actually doing glass work now. That's reminiscent of a show that my master show in 1966. And I'm starting to do glass again, which is interesting. But anyway, so that's this. This is fairly simple. I wanted to keep, because I knew it was large, I didn't want to break it apart. I wanted continuity, so I kept the colors similar. And it's a low tone, it's never that bright or anything like that. But that's how I work. It's very spontaneous, and what comes out is what you get. And I'll show you the last. I started this one exactly like the other one, except I guess I was going around a little bit in circles and lines. Started again with a palette-sized gallon of quart, I should say, of black house paint, and started putting in some of these black lines, and had some circles, and it just evolved. And I really got excited about the colors, very dull, monochromatic colors. Here I sort of went out, went, wow, my friend looked at it and said, wow, so that's, for a while I was going to call it that. I call it passion. It's just alive, passionate. Again, it's acrylic. There's even some watercolor techniques you'll see that are similar, perhaps, to the older painting. Many of you know about my background, so if you don't, I'll tell you. But I've been doing painting all my life and teaching, I think, all my life. And my friends, even when I look at their painting, every once in a while I'll say something automatically, but I know I perhaps shouldn't give criticism or something, but it comes out so quickly before I can control myself. And it's different. I guess each one I do, I want it to be different, and it's not a repeat of repeat.
How long ago did you paint this?
Last, what was it? Last year. Yeah, it's this year.
Oh.
This year. Both of these big ones are this year. That's 4 foot by 4 foot, 48 inches by 48 inches. That's the largest I've ever done. I don't think I'll do it again. It doesn't fit into cars. Jose came to pick it up in his car, and he had to go back and get a van. So.
I wonder how often artwork is created within confines, which cuts down on your creativity.
Well,
sometimes,
I figured I naturally found out how the artists do these huge ones. They roll the canvas. The stretcher strips are sent separately, and when it gets to the museum, they put it all together. I mean, you can't possibly, well, they can haul in trucks, I mean, they do a lot, but being practical. Actually, this was 48 by 48, but I just wanted to focus it on the center. The outside got to be just busy things. It wasn't necessary to the painting.
I'm Teresa Ferguson, and my medium is watercolors. Over the years, I've painted all my life. I've worked in just about every other medium, including, clay and even gourd crafting. But for about the last 25 years, I've worked primarily in watercolors. It's a challenging medium, but it's also fun. And I think one of the reasons that I like it is because you can just really push the limits so much on it. I'm drawn to anything that has a lot of color, bright colors, and I generally will start out with my light colors, and I build up layers. Sometimes layering may build up, 10, 15 layers before I get to the top. I'll start out putting the light colors down and putting my subject, getting it all worked out, and then start putting the color on, and then that top layer, I'll go in and start making brush strokes that gives it a little more of a painterly look to it. But I'm very detail-oriented, and very much so in composition. All of my work is pretty much detailed. Every once in a while I'll throw out some abstract work, but then that just throws everybody too much. I like a lot of the Florida tropical things. You'll see that in any of my work. I paint fairly fast. I can really sit down and do a painting in a weekend's time. By the time I've done the drawing and transferred it to the paper, I've already, this whole time, I'm working it out in my head exactly what I want it to look like. I want this light, I want this dark, and so that by the time I sit down and start painting, I'm just slapping away, and I know in my head already what I'm doing. And of course, with watercolors, every now and then you have to take a different route when things don't work out. And I think that's one of the challenging parts about it, is that you can start one direction, and if something's not working, you've got to be loose and free enough to say, okay, well, let's go this way with it. And a lot of times it just always works out for the best. We hear people say all the time that watercolors is such a hard medium, and I don't think so at all. I just really love it. I think you just have to be open to change directions as you're working. I'm also quite a photographer. I do a lot of photography, and most of my paintings are from photographs. I like to take photographs and I'll combine them, but generally if I'm out photographing, just because of the composition that I know I'm looking for, I can usually capture that in my camera. And then when I set down to paint, then it's just a matter of leaving out what I don't want, and sometimes if I'm painting something, I may take another photograph and I start combining everything. But I do fairly detailed drawings of all my work before I begin. This is one, the Bird of Paradise, and you know, most of these have probably been done within 3 or 4 days' time of painting, you know, maybe 5-6 hours a day. So, and if you look, there's a lot of, you know, anything like this, it's probably got 5 or 6 layers built up. This is what makes watercolors so exciting, is that you start out with a very light layer and you just keep building up till you punch in those really rich, bright colors. And this is one of mine too. Again, this one even more so. You can see such a difference between the light layers and building up. By the time I get over here to these dark layers, you know, I may have 7, 8, 9, 10 layers of paint going on. I don't usually use masking fluid. Masking fluid is a medium, it's like a rubber cement that you can put down to save white areas. And when I've worked on both of these coconut paintings, I did that because a lot of this stuff coming out, I started with this doing like the distance first, working these light strokes here, and this one over here also, and then working my way forward. So I needed to mask out these front areas so that I could be freer with my strokes coming down in there. And then I would just take off masking as I'm working my way to the front of the painting. I enjoy just anything that's got a lot of color to it, and usually even a photograph. By the time I finish with it, it's going to be punched up and be brighter. And I try and make it more alive than what you see in the photographs. I've worked, I teach watercolors also, and I always tell everybody that when they say they can't paint, it's only because you haven't had anybody to show you how. I started probably about 25 years ago painting in watercolors, and I just didn't really have anybody to show me how to use the medium, so I was still trying to use it like oils and acrylics, and that didn't work at all. So it was a lot of going to workshops, and back when I first started, Clay Kent had a gallery over here on Galley, and he used to have different people come in and give workshops, and so I started going to those. And then every time there was a workshop with somebody in watercolors, I'd go and sit and watch, and it's like, okay, how are you using that brush and how are you using the water? Because it's all about how much water, how much pigment. So little by little, it was just a lot of working it out. And then this is another coconut. And here again, this one even more so. You can see I started with these back layers of the fronds, and just gradually started working my way forward. And usually by the time, I don't put a lot of my darks in right off the bat, I'll start working in the color composition. And then as I get up to the top part, then I start putting it across the room and walking out of the room and coming back in. And you can just see where you need to go in and darken colors, where you maybe need to change a line or something. And I will actually probably look at a painting for about another week. And just going back and doing little touch-ups and going, okay, that needs a punch of dark, between the dark and the light that moves things back and forward, and you know, and then whatever your subject is, that's like the star of the painting, you want that to stand out. So I usually go in and punch in just even some brighter colors or some more darks to make it pop forward. And sometimes it's even just maybe going in and washing out a color because this area is standing out so much, and that's just the supporting actor. And you don't want it to take away from the star of the painting.
Listening to the other artists, how their personalities come through. I thoroughly enjoy art. To me, art is so much part of my life that it's just the same thing. But I don't sketch, I don't plan, I don't worry. I'm usually the day before I have a deadline, and like I have to take 3 works to Palm Beach next week, and I haven't started them, you know? And it's a huge show, and it's very important to me. But you know what? From experience, I know that it'll happen because it always works. So I have been known to, I've done a lot of things. I started in pottery. I've done sculptures. I have one sculpture here in the museum that I built it, and after I built it, it kept growing bigger and bigger, and then I couldn't get it out of the house. So it was like, wow, and what do you do now? And then rent a truck to bring it to the museum, and I don't plan, which is, I'm not saying it's good, I'm just saying that's who I am. You know, I see Nancy with her sketches and her pictures and her layers and her hours, and I'm going like, wow, you know, I kind of would like to be like that, but I'm not. So, anyways, when I paint, or when I do anything, I totally get into that abstract zone and that's, I think, why I like it so much, because it helps me with my life. It helps me get myself out of the daily worries or whatever is happening. And I just paint. I just have a blank canvas, I throw paint, and I throw more paint, and when it's not working, I white it out and put more lines, and usually, all the time, actually, things just happen. And I know what was worrying me at the time, or why it came out. You know, the paintings talk back to me, and until they do, I know that I just have to keep the exercise going, because it's not, you know, the dialogue is not there yet. But once that dialogue starts, I know where I'm going to, and then it's just experience, and you know what you know and how do you resolve. You know, the composition, all those things come later, and you know, Fran was talking about the limitations that you have about taking work and all that. I started working, see that the one at the end is mine too, and it's 27 by 27. And I usually like to work large, but I just have a car, so I don't have a van or anything like that, so it's very hard for me to take things around. So I have resolved that problem by combining, working with these deadlines that we all have to deal with. This work was due Friday, on a Friday. Mm-hmm. And on Sunday, you know, I wasn't ready. So Sunday, today I'm gonna just do it. This was started. I mean, it's not that I started from scratch, but it wasn't, you know, nowhere. It didn't even look what this looks now. But I had my parents. Well, I have my mother still, but my father was very ill. He was at hospice at the house, and actually this was Sunday. He died on Monday. So And you know, to me, it totally reflects. It's called rebirth because I was just dealing with all those emotions, and it happened. So
They're satiated, Jackie. So
Okay. Well,
So-
and I'll be very brief, I'm
no,
sure.
no, no. I don't
Yes.
mean that. They're just.
But I'll be brief anyway,
And
because
your
that's
name?
my nature. I'm Jackie Scone. And I do stained glass. And these are 4 of my pieces here. And I'm kind of like Grace, I guess. I'm self-taught. Dabbled in art, took art classes in college, and messed around with it, but never made it a life. Couldn't, you know. You just can't. You don't think you can. And I have 7 children. And they consume my life. We have 3 adopted ethnic children at home right now who have very influenced my life. My husband and I were part-time missionaries for years. And I love stained glass. I always wanted a stained glass lamp, and I could never afford it. And my girlfriend was taking a class, and I asked if I could watch her. And she said, sure, so 3 hours on a Saturday morning, and that was it for me. I didn't sleep for 3 months, I don't think, and I cleaned houses until I could afford the grinders and the wheels and the cutters and the glass, and that was the beginning. And after about a year, my husband said, you need to start designing, quit buying patterns, and it just went from there. So I entered a contest almost immediately after I started designing, and I got a place in a publicized magazine, and that was exciting. And I did lamps for 10 years. I started 21 years ago. I've been in Melbourne since 1971. 21 years ago, I don't even know when that was. Around, well, the same time one of my oldest son was born, in 1985. I did lamps for 10 years, and then I kind of got, well, we adopted some children that were very ill, and I spent time with them, and then it was enough. I was like Grace, busting out at the seams. I had to do something or I was going to explode. I couldn't sleep at night for seeing colors and visions, and then I started doing the big entryways. I haven't gotten to Preston Studios, but I love doing the big chunky pieces and using wild colors. And this is a koi pond that I've done. This is my piece. It's I saw something in a tapestry that I really liked, and I just emulated it in glass to my best, I don't know, best ability, I guess. This piece is called Women of Strength, and my husband lost his mother last year to cancer, and I had gotten an email from another friend of mine who has cancer, had cancer and hopefully doesn't any longer, and it was a stamp that was being published, and she sent me this email. She's in her 80s, and she said, let's all run out and buy the stamp, and we'll stamp out breast cancer. And so I ran in April of '05 and ran to the post office, and I said, I'm here to buy the cancer stamp. And they were like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And they showed me what they were selling, and I said, no, the one that's coming out now with the ladies on it, no stamp. So I went later in the year and no stamp, and then I went January of '06, and I said, I want to see your cancer stamps. I'm here to buy them and stamp out cancer. And of course, my husband lost his mom last year, and I was all fired up for something, and no stamp. So I did some research and found out that at this point it's just a painting. And the lady had intended for it to benefit cancer, so I started sketching it, and I was also working on a 9-foot by 9-foot entryway for a woman who had lost her 31-year-old daughter last year to cancer. And I was having a glass of water in her kitchen. I saw this really cool piece of stained glass in her house. She's a great art collector. And I said, ooh, great piece, blah, 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 where'd you get it? And she told me the name of the artist, which you probably might know her. And it was a cancer benefit piece that she had purchased for her home. And she said, and by the way, you need to build one because the cancer benefit's coming up. And I said, I've already started it. And so this came from that piece. And I did win second place in a national design contest with it. Got a nice little check and was a little excited. So I think sometimes my husband gets angry that I kind of lay it off and go, oh, stained glass, it's just a craft. and I know anybody can do it. I teach across the street, and Bobby's been my biggest, I don't know, just my biggest inspiration and encourager. She just believes in all art, and she believes all people should be taught. And I think here at the museum, we want to offer the opportunity for all to learn and delve into it without having to become bankrupt. I think sometimes when you take a class, you end up spending $600–700, and then you get home and you're like, I don't really like this. I don't like cutting myself up and bleeding all over. And I had a girlfriend many years ago, probably 18, 19 years ago, who was a fabulous artist, and she had this big doorway beside her door, and she said, just teach me how to do it, I'll build my own. And I said, no problem. I've taught several hundred people how to do glass. And she sat there dripping, she was a potter, and she sat there dripping blood, and she said, you do it. So I did it for her. But actually the lamp is my husband's. I built it for Christmas for him one year, and he keeps it in his office, and he let us borrow it here. It's one of the flat panel lamps. You guys are familiar with the molded lamps. We call them Tiffany lamps. I've only done a couple of those in my life because they're very labor intensive and very expensive. But these little flat panel lamps, how many of you have ever messed around with or owned stained glass? You build stained glass? Do? Oh, cool. So you might be my biggest critiquer, which I always need. You just build your 6 panels and then you just form them together. Have you built lamps?
I know I haven't done it.
You haven't?
But I know how it's done.
I chose to do a little bit of something different because typically you'll have a spine on your lamp, and I just left these openings and I put the spine pieces in last. And I usually just pick up my vases at thrift stores or yard sales or antique stores or whatever. And my husband had been bugging me for years, like, I want a lamp for my office. So I built this for him. And usually with stained glass, it's a little bit different than perhaps abstract painting. You have to go in with a plan. It might take me weeks to do 12 thumbnail sketches for someone's entryway. They might come to me and say, Jackie, I want you to do my entryway. I love Victorian, I love cranberries and greens, and one woman had me do the whole west side of her wall, which faced the river, and she wanted everything to be very, very tropical. She knew exactly what kind of flowers, what kind of trees and plants, and so then you go home. What I go